So I've lived the majority of my life here in DeFuniak Springs. I was born in Fort Walton Beach, but immediately came back to DeFuniak Springs and was here for the first 24 years of my life. And then once I graduated college, I moved away for about 10 years, and then the last 6.5 years I've been back here. So when I left here, I left because of work. I worked for Walmart, and they moved me out of here, and my intention was always to find a way to come back here. And luckily, like I said, about 6.5 years ago, I found the opportunity to be able to come back to DeFuniak Springs in Walton County, and I missed it, and I'm glad to be back. So my dad moved here in the mid-'70s in order to take a job at Eglin, working at the Climatic Laboratory, which, if you don't know what that is, it's a huge airplane hangar that is climate controlled. So here's a picture of me and my sister there when they made it snow inside of there. When I was a kid, I remember going into a TG&Y, Toys, Guns, and Yo-Yos in the square where Winn-Dixie is now. I remember going in there and shopping. As a kid, I remember going with my dad to the landfill to take his trash. I mean, we didn't have people that came around and picked our trash up, so I believe it was Saturday mornings. We got up and went over there and did that. After we dropped the trash off, we would come back to Twin Lakes, which was right there, 331 North and 90, where it intersected. He'd get my sister and myself a root beer, and he would buy a lottery ticket every Saturday morning after that, and we would go back home for the day. When I was in school, in elementary school, we lived down a clay road, which back then the majority of the roads were clay, and I remember one specific instance where I don't remember if it was a hurricane or just where it rained a lot, where our road flooded out. So our school bus had to stop there, and my brother and my mother and one of our neighbors was at the other side of the little creek that had overflowed the road. So my brother had to wade across that creek and picked my sister up and toted her back across the creek to get home, and then he came and got me and crossed the creek, and of course school was shut down for the rest of the week because the school buses couldn't run. So as a child, we're super happy to have that time away, but it wasn't long after that they did come and pave our road. So we didn't have that problem after that going forward. I also remember the grand opening of the Walmart when I was a kid, but not even the Walmart that we currently have, but the old Walmart. I remember going in there right after it was first opened, and spending the majority of the time shopping there. Back then, Walmart didn't open until afternoon on Sundays. So I remember going to church, and then after church, you'd run over to Walmart to get a few items before going back home for the day. Before there was a Lowe's, there was Scotty's Hardware. That was in the old shopping center where Tractor Supply is now. That's where we did all of our hardware shopping, other than Ace. Ace was there when I was a kid, between those two places. So when I was a kid, I remember going into the big store there on Main Street. My aunt worked there, and I remember going in there and shopping while she was there. Of course, Main Street's changed tremendously over the years. At one point, it got pretty dilapidated, and then now they've revitalized it, so it's much better. But as a kid, we really didn't spend a whole lot of time down there on Main Street. I do remember, going on Halloween, not on Main Street, but around the lake yard, trick-or-treating as a child, and that was a pretty big thing. And of course, Chautauqua Festival was a big thing as a child down on the lake yard, where they just had music all day and games and different things. They always had the 4th of July fireworks. I remember going down to the lake yard for that. I mean, I just remember when there wasn't anything where the Walmart is now. Wasn't nothing but pine trees. I mean, I remember before there was no Burger King, there was no Taco Bell, there was McDonald's and Hardee's when I was a kid, but none of those other fast food places were there. All that was pretty much land, undeveloped land throughout there. I remember as a child, and one of the main reasons why I never really liked going to the beach, because as a child, my mother had a Ford Pinto that had vinyl seats with no air conditioning. And when you're driving a 2-lane road from DeFuniak down to the beach in those conditions, it would take, it could take anywhere from 30 minutes to an hour, depending on the day. And there was a drawbridge that crossed over the bay, and sometimes you had to sit there and wait for the little boats to go across while that draw was open, and other times you got to go right through it. But I remember sitting there and waiting several times for that, going and spending the day at the beach and being super hot and sunburnt and having to come back riding in that car with those vinyl seats stuck to my body, which wasn't a pleasurable experience for me. But that was back before most of those beach accesses were even built. Or I remember going to Grayton State Park when I was a kid. That was where we mainly went to the beach because they had bathrooms. There was no other bathrooms down there. But then once Ed Walton access was built, there was bathrooms, and then we transitioned over to that beach access that we went to as a kid. And then as they built the new bridge, I remember going with my brother, because half of the old bridge was still there, and we would go fishing with cast net on Friday nights when the mullet would come in at high tide. We would spend a lot of time out there doing that. 98 was 2 lanes. 30A didn't have, the multi-use path wasn't on there. There were old houses. I remember in high school, one of my best friends' grandparents owned a beach house down there, and they were all small houses. I mean, their beach house was probably 1,200 square feet, 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom in the middle, and a kitchen, living room in the main part of the house. And that's what every house was down there. They were all little small houses where people lived, and you had your beach access. We walked right across to the beach. Did what we wanted to pretty much on the beach at those times. Just as a child, it just seemed like forever when you're going to the beach and you're waiting and you don't see anything. Now when you're seeing buildings as you go, it passes the time a little bit quicker. But when there's nothing but the trees, it just seems like it takes you forever to go through there. So my kindergarten teacher was Miss Adams at Maud Saunders. That was probably my favorite teacher throughout my entire school history there, I guess. Mr. Harrison was the principal at Maud Saunders when I was a kid. And the middle school, I distinctly remember Mr. Hewlin. I don't know if he was, yes, he was the principal. Mr. Hewlin was the principal at the middle school. I remember him, as well as Mr. Pugh as the vice principal when I went to the middle school there. And that was the old middle school. They've completely built a new middle school. And then in high school, we had Mr. Miller was our principal. And that was at the old high school. They built the new high school since then. That was back when we had a totem pole in the front instead of the Indian riding the horse, which they have now out there. When I was a kid, a lot of the fun that we had was we went fishing quite a bit. I don't think that there's many places in Walton County, many lakes or ponds that I've never fished in. We fished all the time, anywhere we went. And we would even, in the summertime, if we were driving down the road and we wanted to go swimming and we saw some water on the side of the road, a pond or lake or spring, we would just pull over, jump in, swim a little bit, lay out for a little while and hop back in the car and leave. I mean, it was so much more of an open environment. Now, I think you have to worry about what's in the water. As a child, I didn't really think much about alligators, but it seems like now that there's probably alligators in all those swimming holes we swam in. I do remember one night we were catfishing at a pond, and we had our line sitting out there, and we were just sitting there, and all of a sudden you heard this ginormous splash in the water. And we realized that night we probably didn't need to be in that watering hole anymore. We needed to move on to a different pond to go fishing. I think, for me, when I left here, I lived in several larger cities up into the largest city that I lived in was Dallas. You're talking in the Metroplex, 10 million people. And I lived there. I only lived there for a year, but I will say that I never had, really never met anyone other than people that I worked with. Whereas living in a small town or growing up here in DeFuniak, I knew we lived down a road that was a mile long, dead end road, mile long. I knew every single person that lived on that road. I knew that as a child, when I came home, if my parents weren't there, I could go to my neighbor's house. I knew my neighbors. Miss Ann, Mr. Earl was their names. And if my parents weren't home for some reason, you didn't have cell phones, so you couldn't call them and check in, I would go stay with them, or I would go across the road and stay with the other neighbor until then. So I think for me, growing up in a small town, I pretty much knew everybody, and I felt comfortable with people. When I would go to the store, you would run into several people that you knew, but living in a big town, it may be weeks or months before you ran into that same person. And even moving back here, when I moved back here, when I go to the grocery store, I run into people that are from high school or people that, were my teachers when I were in school and different things. So I think that, to me, it's just that sense of community that you have in a small town or a smaller area versus those larger towns where you don't really have that. As a child, I felt completely comfortable, and I think my parents felt completely comfortable with me going to the lake yard as a child during those festivals and things and just going around. Whereas now, I don't know that I would allow my child to just freely roam around at those festivals or even at the beach. Even when we go to the parades, they're with me the whole time. Whereas when I was a kid, they just let you go. But I think that's a lot of it. But the town has grown tremendously, in that time frame, and the county obviously has probably tripled since I was a child. If I had to describe Walton County, I think I would describe the individuals that are from here and live here as caring. I think they care about the other people that live here as well. You know, just back to kind of what I said earlier about my neighbors and everything. I mean, they truly cared about me. You know, the people that I go to church with, they care about me. They make sure that I'm safe. The people that I work with, they care about each other and want to take care of each other. That's how I would describe it. I would describe it as just a caring community, a caring county that care about other people and truly want to see those other people successful.